A restaurant manager was found brutally murdered during what looked like a late-night robbery. The safe was empty. Cash was gone. The killer had vanished without leaving a single obvious clue. For 15 years, everyone chased a stranger who never existed. Meanwhile, the real killer attended the victim's funeral. He comforted her grieving family. He sat beside her father as he learned his daughter was dead, knowing he was the one who had killed her. So how did he fool detectives for over a decade? Why did investigators completely overlook the man closest to the victim? And how did a cigarette thrown into a trash can 15 years later unravel a murder that had seemed impossible to solve? What police uncovered next wasn't just shocking. It exposed one of the most chilling acts of deception you'll ever hear. Because this wasn't a robbery, it was something far more terrifying. And by the time detectives realized the truth, the killer had already been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. Kindly tell us in the comment section where you're watching from as we proceed. Here's the thing about this case. It's not a mystery about who could have done it. It's a mystery about why nobody looked at the person standing right in front of them. For 15 years, police believed this was a robbery. A stranger, they thought. Someone who wanted cash and panicked. Every clue seemed to agree. The safe was open. Money was missing. A window was cracked open. It looked like a robbery. It smelled like a robbery. But looks can lie. In 1998, a retired expert sat through a long briefing on this case. He listened to 15 years of dead ends. Then he stood up and said something that changed everything. He said, "This was never a robbery." He said a stranger doesn't stab someone hard enough to hit the floor underneath them. A stranger doesn't wrap a dying woman's head in plastic and hold it there until she stops breathing. That kind of violence has a name. It's called overkill. And overkill isn't about money. It's about rage. It's personal. It comes from someone who knows you, someone who loved you, maybe, someone who couldn't stand losing you. That one idea changed everything, from robbery to rage. Once police stopped looking at strangers and started looking at the people close to Terry, the case cracked open fast. We're going to walk through exactly how that happened, who Terry Brooks really was, what was happening in her life before she died, and how a single cigarette butt pulled from a trash can finally gave her killer a name. Stay with us. This one is hard to hear, but it matters. Terry Lynn Brooks was born September 13th, 1958, in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. She was the kind of kid who did things the right way. Good grades, good manners, a quiet drive that people noticed early. In 1980, she graduated with honors from the University of Maryland. Her degree was in behavioral science. Her plan was human resources, a steady office job. But something else pulled at her during college. She waited tables to help pay for school, and she found out, almost by accident, that she loved it. The noise, the rush, the way a team pulls together under pressure. So she made a choice that surprised people. She skipped the office job. She went into restaurant management instead. By early 1984, Terry was 25. She had just been promoted to night manager at a Roy Rogers restaurant in Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania. For an ambitious young woman, this wasn't a dead end. It was one more step up the ladder. She lived close to her father, George, and her stepmother, Betty. She was close with her sister, Vicky, too. People described her the same way, again and again. Kind, driven, generous, funny. And she was engaged. Her fiancé, Scott Keith, was 22. They had been together for a while. A summer wedding was already planned. Just 2 days before the worst night of her life, they had put down a deposit on a honeymoon trip to Hawaii. Scott called her at work sometimes. He drove by the restaurant at night just to check on her. To everyone around them, it looked like devotion. It looked like a man who loved his fiancée. Nobody knew yet how differently that same behavior would read later, because checking on someone you love and keeping tabs on someone you don't trust can look exactly the same from the outside. Roy Rogers restaurants weren't strangers to trouble. This location had already been robbed twice before. Closing alone, late at night, was just part of the job. Terry had accepted that when she took the promotion. Friday, February 3rd, 1984. Terry worked the closing shift. By 1:30 in the morning, the last worker had clocked out. Terry stayed behind, alone, doing the same paperwork she did every Friday, counting the drawer, balancing the safe, locking everything down for the weekend. She locked the doors behind her coworkers. She always did. Somewhere between 1:30 and 6 that morning, someone got inside that restaurant. There was no broken glass, no forced door, no shattered lock. Whoever came in that night, Terry let them in herself. What happened next took time. The coroner would later say this clearly. This wasn't a few frantic seconds. This was drawn out. She was beaten. Her head was slammed against the concrete floor. She was strangled, hands tight around her throat. A kitchen knife was driven into her neck, with enough force to go clean through and strike the tile underneath her. And she was still alive. The stab wound had paralyzed her. It had not killed her. So her attacker reached for a plastic trash bag. He wrapped it around her head, and he held it there. She suffocated, conscious, aware, unable to move. That is how Terry Lynn Brooks died. On the floor of the restaurant she was proud to manage, still wearing her winter coat. At 6 that morning, the day manager arrived for the breakfast shift. He unlocked a door that had never been broken. He walked into a kitchen that looked normal at first. Then he saw her. Her shoes had been knocked against a far wall. Her purse was emptied across the floor. The safe stood open. About $2,500 was missing. The drive-thru window sat cracked open, just enough for someone to slip through. Every single exterior door was locked. To the first officers on scene, that detail sealed the story. A robbery, a stranger, someone who panicked and turned violent. It was a clean, simple explanation. It was also completely wrong. While police worked the scene, Terry's family faced their own quiet horror, hours before anyone told them the truth. That morning, there was a knock at George and Betty's front door. Vicky answered it. Standing there was Scott Keith. He said he'd been driving by. He noticed Terry's car wasn't in the driveway. That struck him as strange, he said, so he came to check. George's stomach dropped. He walked straight to Terry's room. The bed hadn't been slept in. Everything sat exactly where she left it the night before. She had never come home. George picked up the phone. He called the restaurant. The day manager answered. George said he was Terry's father. He asked if she was there. The manager told him what he had found that morning, that his daughter was dead, that she had been murdered. George was still holding the phone when those words hit the room. Betty was there. Vicky was there. Scott Keith was there too, sitting in their kitchen, watching. A short while later, police arrived to make it official. Keith hadn't left. He sat with the family through all of it, through the disbelief, through the first waves of grief. Vicky later said it felt like a bomb going off inside the house. There was nowhere to put the feeling, just the sudden, permanent absence of someone they loved. And sitting quietly in that kitchen, watching every second, was the one person who already knew exactly what had happened. It would take 15 years to understand what that morning really was. Police built their whole case around how the scene looked. An open safe, missing cash, a cracked window. That was the shape of a robbery. For a long time, nobody questioned that shape. Investigators worked the scene carefully. They lifted around 15 fingerprints. None of them matched anything in any database. They also found something else, something that would matter far more later. Skin tissue, found under Terry's fingernails, and near a wound on her right ring finger. She had fought back, But in 1984, DNA testing didn't really exist yet, not in any usable form for police work. That tissue sample was carefully stored away. It would sit there, untouched, for 15 years. Investigators had one early suspect, a recently fired cook named Steve Daly. Terry had let him go after a violent outburst in the kitchen. Getting fired didn't make him disappear. He kept coming back as a customer, sitting in the dining room, watching. Coworkers noticed. Terry noticed too. When police brought him in, his alibi was weak, but he agreed to a lie detector test, and he passed it. Without more proof, detectives had to let him go. Then, 2 weeks after the murder, something else happened. A manager at a nearby Roy Rogers was attacked while closing alone. A man came out of the bathroom where he'd been hiding. She survived, but the similarities were hard to ignore. 1 week after that, in Scranton, another employee wasn't as lucky. She was attacked closing alone, robbed, killed when she couldn't open the safe fast enough. Scranton police had a suspect there, a man named Steve Duffy. Falls Township investigators compared his fingerprints to the ones from Terry's scene. No match. Both of those other cases turned out to be unrelated. But by then, the damage was already done. The idea of one roaming predator had taken hold. It shaped every question investigators asked from that point on. Every lead pointed outward, toward strangers, toward patterns, toward random violence. Scott Keith was interviewed early on, just as a routine step. He said he wasn't at the restaurant that night. He had an early shift the next morning, he said. Terry's family described him as devoted and caring. He had an alibi. Police cleared him and moved on. By the mid-1980s, every lead had dried up. The fingerprints matched no one. The stranger theory had completely fallen apart, and the one piece of evidence that could solve it sat locked away, waiting for technology that didn't exist yet. The case went cold. Cold cases don't freeze in some dramatic way. They just quietly stop moving, while everything around them keeps going. 1984 became 1990. 1990 became 1995. The Roy Rogers, where Terry died, eventually shut down for good. The intersection kept its normal traffic, indifferent to what had happened there. George and Betty stayed in Falls Township. They kept driving the same roads Terry used to drive. They lived just minutes from a wound that never fully closed. Something quietly split the two of them over those years. Neither one said it out loud for a long time. Betty had never accepted the robbery theory. She couldn't fully explain why. It was a feeling more than a fact, something about how personal the violence felt. She never brought it to police. She never said it publicly. She just carried it. George didn't share that feeling. To him, police had done everything they could. The answers simply hadn't come yet. That was the story he had to live with. Two people, one loss, two very different ways of surviving it. Meanwhile, Scott Keith moved forward with his life, in ways that now feel almost impossible to read as innocent. He married someone else. He had a child. That marriage ended in divorce. Eventually, he moved back to his parents' house, still in Falls Township, not far at all from the family he once called his own. Contact with the Brooks family faded to almost nothing. He drifted out of their daily lives. Even if he never fully left their thoughts, nobody was watching him. Nobody had a reason to. For over a decade, the man who knew the truth lived quietly, a few miles from the people still grieving what he'd taken. By the late 1990s, the file had been cold for 14 years, but outside that evidence locker, the world had kept changing. DNA science had transformed completely. Cases that were unsolvable in 1984 were being reopened everywhere, and some of them were closing, with results nobody could have imagined a decade earlier. In 1998, Falls Township got a new police chief. His name was Arnold Connelline. He looked at the old file and saw something others had stopped seeing: possibility. He believed the DNA evidence in storage could finally talk. He reopened the case. Then he did something no one in that department had tried before. He brought the file to a group in Philadelphia. They were called the Vidocq Society. It's exactly what it sounds like. A private club of retired detectives and forensic experts. They meet once a month, over lunch. Each time, they take on one cold case. No fee, just a shared drive to solve it. By the time Falls Township brought them Terry's file, the group already had a strong reputation for spotting things local police had missed. A forensic psychologist named Richard Walter sat through the presentation. 14 years of dead ends. A robbery theory that never produced a real suspect. When the detectives finished, Walter stood up. He told them they had the wrong crime. For 14 years. This wasn't a robbery, he said. The violence was too personal, too extreme. What robber stabs someone hard enough to hit the floor underneath? What robber stays long enough to smother someone with plastic? A robber is simply not going to do that, he told them. It's not efficient. There's no value in that kind of activity. The open safe, the missing cash, the cracked window. Walter didn't see a motive in any of it. He saw a cover-up, clumsy, almost desperate, laid over something much darker. The real crime, he said, was rage. And rage like this almost always comes from someone close. A boyfriend, a fiancé, an ex, someone who felt rejected, someone who felt like they were losing control. His instructions were simple. Stop chasing strangers. Go back to the people closest to Terry. Look at anyone she may have pushed away before she died. In one single afternoon, a 14-year-old theory fell apart. Investigators went back to square one. Old files, old statements, every name from Terry's personal life. Reread with fresh eyes, and a name surfaced. A name that should have been in the file from the start, but never was. Her name was Cindy Bradney, a close friend of Terry's from a previous job. She knew things nobody in the family had ever been told. When detectives finally sat down with her in 1998, what she said reshaped the entire case. She told them the relationship between Terry and Scott Keith had grown strained. In the months before the murder, Keith was jealous, possessive, and it got worse once Terry took the Roy Rogers job. Those nightly check-ins, those drive-bys past the restaurant. To the outside world, that had all looked like devotion. Cindy told a different story. It wasn't concern, it was control. He didn't want her working nights. He didn't want her alone. He wanted to know exactly who she was talking to. Terry, Cindy said, was afraid to tell him something important. She was afraid to tell him she didn't want to get married. And here is the detail that changes everything. The week before her murder, Terry told Cindy she wanted to call off the wedding. She just didn't know how to say it to him. Every piece of Richard Walter's theory matched what Cindy had known for years. The personal rage, the rejection, the clumsy cover-up meant to hide something intimate. The robbery theory was dead. For the first time since 1984, police had a real suspect. Finding him wasn't hard. Proving it was another matter entirely. Keith had drifted off the radar for years. But investigators caught a break. He'd recently been arrested for drunk driving in another town. That arrest gave them his current address. He was living in Warminster, Pennsylvania, with his brother, Charles. Investigators began watching the house, quietly, patiently, learning his daily routine. They noticed something small, something that would end up closing a 15-year-old murder case. Keith smoked, and he threw his cigarette butts straight into the outdoor trash. In October of 1998, an officer named Nelson Whitney made his move. Before the trash could be collected, he pulled out the cigarette butts. They also collected a sample from Charles, Keith's brother, gathered quietly at a restaurant. They needed to be certain they could rule him out completely. Then they sent both samples to the lab to compare against the tissue sitting in storage since February of 1984. the tissue from underneath Terry's fingernails. From the moment she fought for her life, Charles came back negative. Scott Keith came back positive. 15 years after Terry clawed at the man attacking her, the evidence she left behind finally had a name. On February 5th, 1999, 15 years and 1 day after the murder, Alfred Scott Keith was brought in for questioning. He was 37 years old, a quiet life, a steady job, no red flags, just a man who, to everyone around him, had simply moved on. He sat down and told the same story from 1984. He wasn't at the restaurant. He had an early shift the next day. He had nothing to do with what happened to Terry. Then investigators told him about the DNA. They told him skin cells under Terry's nails matched his own saliva, found on cigarette butts pulled from his trash. There was no explanation left to give. They asked him to take a lie detector test. He agreed. He failed. After that, his story began to crack. He said he didn't mean for it to happen. Then he stopped himself. He pulled back. He insisted again that he hadn't done it. Investigators kept the pressure steady. They let the silence sit in the room and do its own work. Slowly, his story kept shifting, each version pulling closer to the truth. Then he said something that stopped the room cold. He said she came at him first. For the first time in 15 years, Scott Keith placed himself inside that restaurant. On that night, in that kitchen, there was nowhere left for him to go. What came out next was the confession he'd buried for 15 years. He said he went to the restaurant on purpose that night. He believed Terry was pulling away from him. He needed to know if it was true. Terry let him in through the locked door herself. That detail had puzzled investigators for 15 years. Every entrance was secured, no sign of forced entry. Now it finally made sense. She hadn't let in a stranger. She'd let in her fiancé. They argued. Terry told him it was over. She didn't want to marry him anymore. He said he loved her. He said he couldn't accept it. He said he couldn't let her leave. And somewhere in that argument, something in him broke. He punched her. He choked her with his hands. He grabbed a knife from an open drawer, and he drove it into her throat. She was still alive. He could see her breathing, so he reached for a plastic trash bag. He wrapped it around her head, and he held it there until she stopped. The coroner's findings had already told police this part. The stab wound paralyzed her, but didn't kill her. She was conscious when the bag went over her face. Now Keith was confirming it, in his own words. He knew she was still alive, and he chose to finish what he started. After she was gone, he moved through the restaurant with purpose. He staged the safe. He took the cash. He opened the drive-thru window and climbed out through it, making sure every exterior door stayed locked behind him. So when the day manager walked in the next morning, it would look exactly like what he needed it to look like: a robbery. Then he admitted the part that changes everything. Going to the Brooks family's house wasn't grief. It wasn't worry. It was calculated. He went there to look like the concerned fiancé. So when the news broke, he'd be right there in the middle of it, above suspicion, surrounded by people who trusted him completely. He sat in their kitchen. He watched George make that phone call. He watched a father learn his daughter had been murdered. And the whole time, he knew he was the reason. That single performance kept him free for 15 years. Alfred Scott Keith was charged with first-degree murder and robbery. The district attorney called it one of the most brutal killings he'd ever seen. Prosecutors said they would seek the death penalty. For the Brooks family, the arrest felt like an earthquake. Except for Betty. She wasn't surprised at all. "I thought he was involved all along," she told reporters. "But my husband did not." That quiet 15-year split between George and Betty finally resolved, not with comfort, just with the truth. Betty shared one more detail that still lands hard today. About 2 weeks after Terry's funeral, Keith told the family he had a date, a man who murdered his fiancée, who staged it as a robbery, who comforted her grieving father. was already moving on before the ground over her grave had settled. In 2000, facing the death penalty, Keith pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and robbery. On June 6, 2000, he was sentenced to life in prison. No chance of parole. He gave a brief statement. Very little remorse. No real explanation for 15 years of silence. A detective who worked the case for 7 years said this: "7 years of working on it pretty much wore me out. I'm pretty excited about the decision." The police chief who reopened the case put it simply too. "It was great to bring the case to a close. We hopefully gave the family some peace." Betty said it best of all. "I was shocked, and then I was relieved. Now we can go on with some closure." Here's the lesson this case leaves behind. It's worth carrying with you. The people who love us most, and the people who feel entitled to control us, can look identical from the outside. A phone call to check in, a drive past your workplace. None of it tells you, on its own, if it's love or control. Betty felt something was wrong for 15 years, long before any evidence proved her right. She didn't have facts. She had instinct. And it turned out to be the truest thing in the whole case. If a relationship in your life feels less like love and more like surveillance, that feeling is worth listening to. Terry tried to listen to hers. She just ran out of time before she could act on it. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Next time, we're opening a case that sat forgotten for almost 30 years, until one teenager's diary entry cracked it wide open. See you in the next one.